the Gathering before, unless you're strictly a Legacy Alliance player, which is I can leave. There are windows open. But if not, you've cast a spell before without listening to this talk. So odds are you know the basics of how to cast a spell, and it's something that is incredibly simple to do until it's not. You want to cast Divination, you just say, hey, I'm going to cast Divination. You tap some land, you draw some cards, assuming that they're not countering it. But then when you want to cast Call of the Wild with Eldrazi Spawn tokens, and you want to get creatures with X and mana cost, how do things like that work? And things can get a little fuzzy rather quickly. So, if you look at the comprehensive rules section, 601, you will find this lovely wall of text that will walk you through how to cast a spell. So I'll let you read that over for a sec.
Give us a TLDR or something.
Plain Silks is fun.
No, I mean, all the information's right there. So,
Alright.
any questions? Good?
No.
Alright. So since we have a little bit of time left over, I guess I'll go into a little bit of detail. So the very first bit deals with some of these older cards. And here, everyone should know the best version ether ever. Ripple is an ability that when you cast it, you get to look at the top X number of cards, and you can cast any cards that have the same name. But if you read the reminder text, it says you may play this spell. And when you look at the Oracle, it's been changed to cast. So just a minor thing to keep in track of, especially when you're looking at older cards. That old cards used to say play, now it's been updated to cast. One of the reasons that they've done this is that some cards still deal with play, but play is a general any type of permanent. It could be a land, which is something that you can't do if any ability says cast. You cannot cast a land, you play a land. So cards like Shelldock Isles, very last activated ability there, says you may play the removed card. So that includes a land if you chose to hide away a land. So the first section just deals with that. And then the rest of it deals with the steps of casting a spell. And as you saw, there are a lot of little parts. There are A through I of them. But we can sort of overclassify it into 5 main steps. The first one being you just throw it on the stack. You're going to make all of your choices. You pick some targets. You decide how much is this spell going to cost. Then you pay the ultimate price. So let's go over those 5 things in a little bit of detail. And so hopefully what we can do is go over those 5 steps in a little bit of detail. And then I've got about 5 or 6 examples that we can just go over and make sure that we actually understand what's going on with casting a spell. So the first thing is rather self-explanatory. You put it on the stack. You hopefully verbally communicate to your opponent in some fashion and go, hey, I would like to cast said spell. Whoever puts that spell on the stack is going to be that spell's controller. So even if you get to look through your opponent's graveyard to cast a creature from it, you are the spell's controller. So anything that asks about counter target spell you don't control or something like that, whoever put it on the stack gets to be the controller of that thing. Once we put it on the stack, then we're going to go through and make a few choices. So what are some examples of choices that I can make during this? Yeah.
Cards where they say choose one, such as Cryptic Command.
Yeah, modes would be a good one. Any others?
Alternate casting costs?
Alternate like what are some examples of those?
Kicker.
Kicker, or no, not kicker. That is an additional cost.
Like pitching a card to Force of Will.
Yeah, pitching a card and paying the life to Force of Will. A big one in standard right now is Awaken. If you're going to Awaken rather than just cast it for its normal mana cost. These can be things like Overload, Mode, what X is going to be if you have any X spells, choices like that. If you have Hybrid or Phyrexian mana, are you going to choose to pay 2 life, or are you going to pay white or blue for the Hybrid spell? My favorite part about getting ready for this presentation was finding that there's a card called Overload that has Kicker instead of Overload. That was hands down my favorite bit about getting ready for this. Essentially what this step of choices is making any choices that aren't choosing a target. There are a few choices that I'll get to a little bit later that you do when resolving the spell, but we're just going to kind of briefly touch on that a little bit later. So the third thing you do, once you've chosen all of your choices, you pick your targets, which again is rather self-explanatory. The reason we do this after we make all of our choices is because what kind of targets we can pick will often depend on what choices we make. Looking at everyone's favorite command, the targets that you can pick are going to depend on which modes you chose. So it's very important that you make these choices before we go through and pick any targets. It's also at this point that we decide how much is going to go where. So something to keep in mind that we'll get to as an example later is if I want to cast some generic X red damage spell that lets me divide it as I choose, and my opponent has an army of phantasmal beasts, bears, and dragons, how can I possibly clear the board with the least amount of mana that I need to spend? And so something to keep in mind is that each of these targets must receive at least one of whatever it is that I feel like dividing. It could be damage, could be +1 counters, could be anything. So after we've gone through and picked out all of our targets, then we need to figure out how much this is going to cost. We need to determine the total, either mana or sacrificing creatures or whatever else we have to do to put this spell on the stack. There are pretty much 4 things that we need to look at, and we look at them in this order. The first thing that we do is we just look at the spell and look at the cost. So if I want to cast this spell just for its normal mana cost, it's going to be 1 white and a blue. Once we just look at that, then we look at any additional effects. So we'll look at Thalia that makes all non-creature spells cost 1 more. So at this point, it's going to cost 2 generic, a white and a blue. Then we look at anything that's going to decrease the cost. So we'll look at Grand Arbiter Augustus IV. He's going to make all of my white and blue spells cost 1 less. So now my spell is just down to a white and a blue, because he's going to subtract 2 off of it because it's both a white and a blue spell. And then we look at Trinisphere. Technically, we don't look at Trinisphere. What the rules actually say is once the total cost is determined, any effects that directly affect the total cost are then applied. And the only card that I know of is Trinisphere that actually sets the cost of a spell to a specific number. The reason that we go through and do this in this order is that we want players to get the benefit out of cards like Grand Arbiter. If we did reduction before we did additions, then Grand Arbiter would reduce it down to a white and a blue, and then Thalia would make it cost 1 more, and then they're not getting the full benefit that they would get out of Grand Arbiter. But by doing that second, if they have Thalia, then it's still only going to cost a blue and a white because of that order that we applied things. And then once we determine how much the spell is going to cost, that cost is locked in. It doesn't matter what happens after we go through this step, that cost is set, and no matter what happens after that, this is going to be what we spend on the forward. So once we do that, we're going to pay the ultimate price. And this is broken up into 2 bits that will become very important in an example I have later. The first bit is that we need to put all of our mana into our mana pool, i.e. activate all of our mana abilities. Once we have put the mana into our mana pool, then we pay the price of the spell by putting that mana from our mana pool to the spell, as well as pay any additional costs, if that's sacrificing a creature or paying an additional 2 life. And this is broken up into 2 parts, and I put pay in quotation marks because it is a distinction that does matter in one of the examples I have coming up, so it's something to keep in mind. So, once you've done all that, congratulations, you have now successfully cast a spell. Literally the exact same process is followed for activating an ability. The rules actually just say, go back to the previous section and read those paragraphs. That's how you activate an ability. Anything that triggers upon casting a spell, they now trigger. The player who had priority before the spell went on the stack, they keep priority. So as a player, you can rack up as many spells on the stack as you want before your opponent has a chance to do anything about that. And I added a little bit on section 608 because I made this talk for a half-hour presentation and I have a little extra time, so I thought I'd go into a little more detail. So just a quick crash course in what to do after you've cast a spell when you're trying to resolve it. The first thing that you want to do is you want to check on any intermediate ifs. So everyone's favorite Valakut. We'll check once the trigger goes on the stack. You can always, unsummon one of their mountains so that they don't have 5 mountains when the ability tries to resolve, and then you're not going to be taking 3 damage to the face. Then we go through and like to check to make sure that all of those targets that we pick are still legal. So when they go in and cast their 1 mana light spell that gives target creature protection of the color of their choice, then we go through and check to make sure, oh, it has protection, I can't legally target anyone. Then we go through, and this is the point that I was bringing up later when we're making choices, that choices that we make in resolving the spell, we make those obviously during the resolution of the spell. So something like Smallpox, where each player sacrifices a creature, discards a card, decides a land, we make those choices during the resolution of the spell. And we follow them in the written order that they're done. So you and your opponent will both pick what's first. Discarding a card, you both pick a card to discard. You discard them at the exact same time. And then if any choices need to be made simultaneously, like sacrificing a creature, you go through and do an active, non-active. So if I cast Smallpox, I would be like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice this creature. Then you all would be like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice this creature. Then we both sacrifice them at the exact same time. Because knowing which creature I might sacrifice might depend, you might change your choice on what creature you want to sacrifice. Then once we've gone through and done everything on the spell, then that spell goes to the graveyard. This last bit is a good distinction to make when we're dealing, especially with cards like Dryad Militant, that sends any instants or sorceries that would go to the graveyard, now they go to exile instead. If I try to kill your Dryad Militant with a Lightning Bolt, the Lightning Bolt will deal 3 damage to it. The Lightning Bolt has done everything on the card. It tries to go to the graveyard, but instead goes to exile. And because the Dryad Militant is still in play when the spell is resolved, with something like Doomblade, it kills Dryad Militant as part of the resolution of the spell. So when Doomblade would go to the exile, normally with Dryad Militant is already gone, so it goes into the graveyard instead of exile, which is kind of a good thing to know. And then section 717 deals with handling illegal actions. So something that I've seen when trying to get rather competitive Magic players into judging for the first time is you'll give them the situation of, I have a Bear Cub and you have a Gutter Skull, and I try to Doomblade your Gutter Skull, and you're like, you can't do that, judge. And a lot of times what I've seen with some more competitive players who get into judging is they'll say, we need to back up to the point where they chose the target. Because putting the spell on the stack, paying the mana, all that jazz, was totally legal to do. It was only when he picked the illegal target, a black creature, that was the illegal action. So we need to rewind to that point, and then he has to target his own Bear Cub. You say, no, that's not how it works, because the rules explicitly tell us that anytime we were trying to take an illegal action, we just rewind all the way back to before the illegal action was starting to take place. We would go back to before Doomblade was even put on the stack. So, before we get into any actual examples, we went through that a little fast, so does anyone have any questions on those bits before we actually go through and do a couple examples? Yes?
So with the Doomblade analogy there, so basically it's because he chose during the targeting step to target the rats there.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we back up.
Yeah.
So it's something akin to basically like we give protection that's different because that's upon resolution, it's an illegal target.
Yeah, and that's because it wasn't that the player took an illegal action in the case of getting protection. It was a totally legal target. But then in response, I give a protection. So then it becomes a part of when trying to resolve, a spell makes sure that it's still a legal target at that point. But in this case, it was never a legal target to begin with. He was making an illegal choice from the very beginning. Whereas previously, if I cast, a Doomblade and then you get a pro black, I never made an illegal choice. Everything that I did was totally legal. So that's sort of the distinction between those two cases. Yeah.
We're rewinding the whole process of casting the spell, right? That includes tapping and untapping mana,
Yep.
lands.
Yep.
Like the swamps that I tap with my Doomblade are gonna get untapped.
Yes.
Cool. This is the same with signets.
Yes.
How about
It's still a mana ability, so we just
Right.
go back and undo all the mana.
But Voyaging Satyr, a card that untaps a land, is not a mana ability, right?
No. And great little side tangent. So what are some of the key characteristics of something being a mana ability versus non-mana ability?
Right.
Yeah.
Number one, it's not a planeswalker ability.
Not a planeswalker.
Number
so
two.
Xenagos and Koth do not count as mana abilities.
And then number two, it creates mana without requiring a target,
Yeah. So something
like Deathwreck Shaman.
Deathwreck Shaman, yes, thank you.
Okay.
That isn't a mana ability because I have to target something. And similar with the untapping a land, you're targeting that land. And so it's not considered a mana ability, so you can respond. So it's not a mana ability, so.
As a follow-up, at regular REL, would you allow a player to take back their Voyaging Saber activation? What's your policy here? I know this is a gray area.
Yeah, so the way that it has to be done is you have to be able to activate the Voyaging Satyr. I'm assuming the Voyaging Satyr just says, tap it.
Untap a land.
Yeah. Is that you have to do that before casting the spell. So if I got called over for that, I probably wouldn't rewind back to before that, because everything leading up to that was a totally legal option, and that definitely doesn't fall under this category where they started an action and then ran into an illegal part of that. Everything they did up to putting the spell on the staff was totally fine, but I could totally be convinced if wiser people than I strongly disagree.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
what I was gonna say is that my experience at regular rel is that they will use that in the middle of trying to cast the spell because
Yeah,
they don't
at
understand
regular-
that.
At
Yeah,
regular,
sure.
totally different.
And in
I
the-
would totally be like,
Yeah,
just-
at an F&M, I would absolutely back all that up.
Yeah, at F&M, that's absolutely what I do. But if this were coming up at like a PPTQ or like some XK type event. Alright. Yeah.
I think to respond more to this question, it also depends on the situation. A lot of players, especially like me included, when playing a competitive rel, will use my Voyaging Satyr to untap my Nykthos in out of order sequencing. I'm going to use my my Voyaging Satyr while I'm casting my spell. I know it's incorrect, like technically, but at the same
But
time,
no
these
one
are
actually-
these are the actions that we lump under out of order sequencing that are going to happen a lot. Like tapping the land that I'm fetching with my Scalding Tarn to save time. And because of the nature of these actions, a lot of the time it does depend on the situation. But a lot of the time I'm just going to be, you should untap your Voyaging Satyr too.
No, very good questions. So, first example is I am at 1 life and I've got a City of Brass and my opponent is at 3 life and I would like to be able to kill him. So going through sort of the 5 steps that we outlined earlier, walk me through exactly how I would go about doing this. So what's the first thing that I want to do when I'm casting a spell?
Announce a lightning bolt.
Put lightning bolt on the stack.
Yeah, put lightning bolt on the stack. I make any choices, which I don't have any, and then I pick my targets. So hopefully I'm going to target my opponent if I would like to win. So after we do that, we don't have really any other choices or divisions to do. So we're going to determine how much it costs, which we just look at the CMC and it's like, okay, it's 1 rep. No addition or reduction, then we'll tap our City of Brass to add red to our mana pool, and we'll cast Lightning Bolt and kill them and win, right?
No,
No! What? Why not?
We are dead.
because you take
Why are
one.
we dead?
You took one.
Ah, yes, because if I actually go through and follow all the steps of casting a spell, and then that 5th step, add mana to my mana pool, then that trigger is going to happen, and then it's going to go on top of the Lightning Bolt, and I'm going to lose 1 life from City of Brass before a Lightning Bolt resolves. But if I wanted to, I could just tap City of Brass with an empty stack and add a red to my mana pool, and then in response to City of Brass's triggered ability, then I could go and throw a Lightning Bolt on the stack on top of that. So one of the things that you don't have to do when casting a spell, as we just brought up with the untapping a target land, is that you can just add all that mana to your mana pool beforehand if you want. This is exactly how all the rituals work. So we don't need to do it in the steps of casting a spell. It's the only time you can activate an ability while casting a spell is a mana ability, but we certainly don't have to do it like that. So the other case that I told you to think about while we were going through this is my opponent has an army of phantasmal bears, dragons, and beasts, and an adorable little bear cub. And I would like to be able to clear the board here. So walk me through how I'm going to go about clearing the board, assuming that we're casting Configurate from the hand. So I'll give you a hint, I throw it on the stack first. Alright. So then what do I do after I put it on the stack?
You need to declare X.
Yes, I need to make all of my choices. And right now the choice of X comes up. So what should I pick X to be?
5.
5? What we got?
Probably 5.
Probably 5.
The least amount of good.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah, we could pick it to be 88 trillion. That's an option, but if I want to use the minimum amount of mana right now. Alright, so we'll pick X to be 5, then what do I do after that?
Pick your targets.
Yep, I go through and pick my targets. So how do I go about, what do I do then?
Pick those 4.
I'm going to pick those 4. Is there anything else I have to do?
You have to assign each of them at least 1 damage.
At least 1 point of damage, yep. So I'll go through and assign the bear, the dragon, and the beast, and the bear cub. Each one, what do I do with that last point?
The cover
That's
gets
my
the
4.
Probably shouldn't.
We should probably assign it to the bear cub, because I'd like to be able to kill it. So then, so how much is this going to end up costing?
11.
Are we flashing it back?
No, we're definitely. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. But yes, we're going to be casting it from hand, so we do X times 2, we essentially pick 5, plus 10 plus 1 is 11. So then it will tap our mana, and hopefully it'll resolve. And then what happens as the spell is trying to resolve?
Triggers.
All the
Yeah.
triggers hit.
We get a whole bunch of phantasmal triggers, they're going to get sacked, and then when the spell resolves, it still sees a bear cub and deals 2 damage to it. But what if instead I had Fireball? So again, we'll throw it on the stack. What do the choice? The only choice I have right now is X. So what do I want X to be?
5.
5 again?
Yep.
Okay, so let's try it with 5. So we'll pick X to be 5, and then so after we've picked our, or after we've made our choices of X being 5, then we go through and target.
Well,
No,
yeah.
it's
You
still right.
also have to choose how many targets you're getting with the second part of that.
Okay, so and now we're in the targeting bit of casting this spell. So now we're going to pick how many targets. So we don't choose, we pick X, then we go through and pick out all of our targets. So we picked X to be 5. Now we can go through and say how many targets we want. And in this example, are we limited in the number of targets?
No.
No, why not?
Because the card says that it has an unlimited amount of targets written on it, but it increases its cost for each target beyond the first one.
Yeah. So one of the big distinctions between these two spells is that in the Confregate, you are dividing the damage. You are saying, I want 1 damage to go here, 1 damage to go there, and 2 to go to the bear cub. Fireball, you don't get to pick how you want that damage distributed. Fireball will just do it on its own. So in that point back in the target slide, when it was saying you have to assign 1 point to each target, that doesn't happen here because you are not assigning anything. So if we picked X to be 5, we went through and picked 4 targets out. We would have to add an additional 3, 1 for each target afterwards. So when we're determining the total cost of our spell, what is the total cost if we pick X to be 5?
9, I think.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep, 9. And then what will happen when it tries to resolve?
It'll do 5 damage.
Yep. Each of the phantasmal things will have triggered because I've targeted them, so they'll get sapped. And when Fireball resolves, it'll deal X damage divided among any number of targets rounded down. So it has 1 target right now, so it'll deal 5 damage to the bear cub. So did I have to pick X to be 5?
No.
No. What could I have picked instead? 2. And then I could have picked 20 trillion targets. And if I didn't have the Phantasmal Army, then it would just divide 2 among 20 trillion and round it down. So that's
None.
0. Yes, thank you. So that would be 0, and totally legal actions would happen from that. So normally, I've always seen on a lot of L1 tests, there's normally some kind of fireball test questions. So it's a good thing to sort of understand how that one card at least works out. So now let's say I've got 3 forests in play, and I've got a couple Eldrazi Scion tokens, and I've got a Court of Calm. And in case you can't read it, the reminder text on Invoke says that each creature you tap while playing this spell reduces its cost by 1 generic mana or the creature's color. So I have these creatures out, and I would like to be able to get my prime time out on board so I can win. So let's go through in the steps of casting a spell. So I'll put Court of Calling on the stack. What do I do next?
Decide what X is.
decide what X is. And since I want to get prime time, X should probably be 6. So I determine my cost. So what it is, I have no targets to fit, so we can just skip that. So determining the total cost, what do I do?
Court of Calling has a cost reduction effect on it, so you can choose to do that. In
Okay.
this case, tapping creatures.
Okay, so it's right now 6 plus 3, so right now it's 9. So we'll use that second step, or that third step, since we have no increases, we'll do some reduction. And we'll tap our Eldrazi, so now it'll only be 6 mana instead of the 9. And then when we go to pay for it, we can sack our Eldrazi, and we've got 6 mana, and we can successfully cast this spell. Right? No, I tricked you all. Except not actually. But yes, this is a good example of why it's important to stay up to date with the release notes and the rules changes. Because if you're at a modern event and a person pulls up a Court of Calling, you will read it and it will say it reduces its cost by 1. And you will make the correct ruling based on that. But it's been updated. Convoke is no longer a cost reduction ability, it is a payment ability. So now it says, if you look at the M15 one, your creatures can help cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting it pays for 1. And this is why I made that important distinction back in the final step of casting a spell between adding mana to your mana pool and paying for the mana. Tapping creatures in Convoke pays for that mana. So I have to put the mana into my mana pool, and then in the process of putting that mana to the spell, then I can tap creatures to use it for Convoke's ability. And here, if I'm sacking my Eldrazi to put mana into my mana pool, then they're not in the battlefield anymore when I go to try to pay for the spell, so I can't use them to tap them for Convoke and get their mana for sacking them. And that's sort of why they made this change to Convoke, because they didn't want players to be able to double dip in things like this. You'll also see the exact same thing in Delve. Logic Knot's original printing said you can exile a creature to reduce its cost by 1, but if you look at Tasker or the Anglerfish, they all say the exact same thing. You can exile a card from your graveyard to pay for 1 mana.
When was that changed?
The Delve?
So for the original court, could you have done it the way we described originally?
Yeah, originally the way Convoke was originally made back in the original Ravnica was it reduced the cost.
And
So it would all be done in that 4th step of casting a spell, where we determine the cost.
So was it just changed with the new court printing?
I believe that.
Yeah, they updated the
Convoke rules updated like 4 months before it, but
Yeah.
it basically.
It was essentially part of the release notes, that in the release notes they always like to put like major rules changes like they did with the dual face cards in Shadows of the Brimstraw. There was like a paragraph in the release notes that's like, hey, just so you know, we're changing the way this works. It used to be like this, now we're gonna do it like this. No, good question. Any other questions on this one? So, the next example is I've got a couple Mirror tokens and I've got a couple Blink Moth Nexuses. And I want to cast my Frogmite, which has an affinity for artifacts. So it's going to cost 1 less for each artifact I control. So let's go through. I'll throw this on the stack. I don't have any choices to make. I don't have any targets to pick. So in the 4th step, when I'm determining the cost, what happens?
The number of artifacts.
Yeah, so the first thing we do is we just look at the spell's cost, which are normally 4. Then we don't have any addition effects, but we do have a couple of reduction effects, like affinity for artifacts. So it's going to see that we have 2 artifacts out in play, so it's only going to cost 2. I'll tap my 2 Blink Moth Nexuses, and we will have cast the spell. But in response, my opponent is going to cast Seismic Shudder, which is going to deal 1 damage to each creature without flying. So that I have no artifacts in play. So now this thing is going to cost 4?
No.
No. Why not?
Because it's already locked in.
Yes, once we determine the total cost of the spell, that is locked in and it will not change no matter what happens afterwards. So we've already put the spell in the stack, we've already paid for the mana, the cost is now locked in. So what happens instead if I were to have a Kragnor Talwer, which is the night side of a Death Watch Recruiter, and I wanted to cast my little Eldrazi Hippogriff for its emerge cost. So walk me through how I'm going to go and cast my Hippogriff.
Put it on the stack.
Put it on the stack. What do I do next?
Choose modes.
Choose, not necessarily mode, but make any choices. What choice do I want to make here?
Alternate casting cost.
Alternate casting costs, like merge. So at this point, do I have to pick, if I had multiple creatures, do I have to pick which creature?
No.
No.
No. It's part of the resolution where you then make all of your choices as part of that result of the ability. So we've decided that we're going to merge this. Then we don't have any targets to pick. So when we're determining the total cost, what do we do? Well, first we'll just look at the merge cost, so it's 5 in the blue. Then what do we look at?
Any additional costs?
Increases or decreases?
All right, so there's no increases to it.
No.
Then what do we look at?
Decreases.
There are no decreases either, the way the ability is worded.
Okay, but
Probably.
what about my halberd? He makes all my creatures cost 1.
Oh, okay, I see that, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, he is, yes, there's a reason this is up here.
I would have more so thinking.
So yes, he's gonna make all my creatures cost 1 5. So that rather than 5 in the blue, it'll be 4 in the blue. So then when we go to pay for the ability, I will sacrifice my only creature in play, which will pay, again, this, pay for that ability by sacking the creature. So we'll pay for it by 2, so that means it was 4, 5 minus 2. I still need 2 generic and a blue. So why are we okay with this even though I don't have a Howler anymore? I'm sacrificing him to pay for the mana, so if I sacrifice him first, do I then have to pay that additional 1 mana? Or should I pay the mana and then sacrifice him afterwards?
The cost reduction isn't payment.
What?
The cost reduction isn't payment, it's part of determining the cost of the spell. So it
yes.
applies first.
Yes. Essentially, yeah, this is reducing the cost before we ever go through and pay. And since we can go through and pay the cost of a spell in any order we want, it's not going to matter if I pay mana, pay the 3 mana I would need for the cost, and then sacrifice, or sacrifice, then pay the mana. Once the cost is determined, just like Frog Might, we've gone through that 4th step of casting a spell where we determine the cost, and then it's locked in. So it doesn't matter that I then sacrifice this creature in the 5th part of casting a spell. Once that cost was locked in, it didn't change, even though we hadn't even finished casting the spell. Alright, so now I've got a Goblin Dark Dwellers, and in my graveyard, I have a slew of options. I've got Ruinous Path, a Sphinx of Revelation, a Burst Lightning, and a Farm Leg. So, if I cast this Goblin Dark Dweller, which lets me cast a instant or sorcery from my graveyard with a CMC 3 or less without paying its mana cost, let's go through and figure out how we can go about casting these spells. So, Ruinous Path, what am I allowed to do with it? Assuming I'm targeting it with my Dark Dweller.
Destroy target creature or planeswalker?
Yes. Can I awaken it?
No.
No, you
Because
can
you're-
only pay 1 alternate cost at a time.
Yes. And casting without paying its mana cost is an alternative cost, and awaken is also an alternative cost. So I'm not allowed to awaken. What about Sphinx of Revelation? Can I cast that?
Sure, for 0
Sure.
life and 0 cards.
Ah, dang it. Why?
Because you don't get to choose what X is if you're not going to actually pay the mana cost.
Yep. So when I'm casting without paying its mana cost, I can't pay any of its mana cost. I can't just put it on the stack and then tap 10 mana, be like, oh, X is just going to be 10. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. When Goblin Dark Dwellers looks at Sphinx of Revelation, X anywhere other than the stack is 0. So I'm going to cast Sphinx of Revelation, totally fine if I need to get those prowess triggers, but I'm not going to draw any cards or gain any life. So what about Burst Lightning? Can I cast that?
Yep.
Yes. Now the real question is, can I kick it?
Yes.
You can. Song? Yeah. Okay. Alrighty then. So yes, why am I able, thank you, someone got it. So why am I able to kick Burst Lightning, but I can't awaken Ruinous Path?
Because-
Additional cost versus alternative.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Kicker isn't something that I pay in addition to whatever cost I'm already whereas Awaken is just a completely different cost other than its mana cost. So I could just throw Burst Lightning on the stack, and then when I'm making my choices, I could choose to kick it, pay the additional 4, and get that ability. What about Far and Away?
You can cast either of them.
Either of them?
Yep. But not both.
But not both. Why not both?
Because Fuse is an alternative way to cast the card.
Yes.
It also says from your hand only to be
Yes, it also
double
says,
whammy.
Fuse explicitly says on the card, you can only do this from your hand. But yes, Fuse is also an alternative casting cost. So how do any of these answers change if instead I have Snapcaster Mage? So let's start with Ruinous Path again. What happens there?
Nothing changes with Ruinous Path.
Nothing changes. I can still just only pay the 3 for the exact same reason we said earlier. Flashback is an alternative cost, so I can't pick Awaken and Flashback. What about Sphinx's Revelation?
Now you can cast it.
You can choose X value.
Yeah, it says Flashback X, white, blue. You can cast it just as if it were from your hand. Burst Lightning, same thing. We can kick it if we want. Far and Away.
Same thing.
Same thing.
Same thing. So here's a fun double face card, or double face card, split card. Thank you, that's what I'm looking for. What would happen if, say, in some alternate universe that said you can't target black cards in any zone for any reason, but I really needed to cast away? Could I maybe get around that somehow with a Snapcaster Mage? If I had, my opponent had some enchantment in magical R&D land that said you cannot target black cards.
Yes.
Doesn't a negative always trump the?
Well, you target.
So
You
even
target.
if you could target it, a negative would say doesn't matter. It's
True.
Yeah.
But, so if it says I can't target black cards, could I target?
You target
far?
far and then cast away.
Isn't Hardaway a blue and black card?
Yeah.
So
It's a blue card / black card. So technically, like it's, I think it's a similar scenario with the CMCs and cards like Goblin Dark Dwellers versus like Research No Way or Boom and Bust, where you can still cast the bigger half, even though it's not technically legal.
Similar sense with like Isochron Scepter, where sure you can throw my cheap little 2-mana thing on an Isochron Scepter, and then when I activate it, I can then cast away. From when I was looking up, and I'm maybe take it with a grain of salt, because I haven't double checked this with any higher levels, but that you could target far and then choose to cast away, because you were targeting far. I'm targeting a blue spell, but when I put it on the stack, I can pick.
Choose the other one, yeah.
I'm gonna like disagree with you.
Okay, I am totally willing to admit I very well may be wrong.
Yeah, my understanding of the fuse cards is they have all of the color identities
Yes.
in any zone other than the stack, and then they are only a blue card if you're
Only
casting
when
the
it's
far
on the
side.
stack.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you pick a certain side, like far or away to cast, that is only that half on the stack. That's
Okay.
the only zone
But
where it
any
operates
other
like
zone.
that.
Okay. This is why you don't make changes at 3 a.m. after a 10-hour card. So, similar case, what if I have Jake's Telepath them down, and I target Ruinous Path? What happens then?
You can cast the Awaken because Jake's ability reads you can cast it, it doesn't give a flashback.
Yeah, it's not giving a flashback. It just says I can cast
Nope.
it, and then it would go to exile.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Pseudo flashback.
Yeah, pseudo flashback. Yes.
So
Yeah.
better than flashback.
I just want to step back and go to Far and Away again,
Mhm.
versus Isochron Scepter. And the reason why is because it's both blue and black,
Mhm.
and in your purpose it is black.
Yeah.
For Isochron Scepter, it's both 2 and 3.
2 and 3.
So that's how we get that difference.
So it would be that you can't, it's both blue and black, right?
Both
Yes,
blue
it
and
is
black.
both blue and black. Yes. So yes, with Jason Rune's Path, you can awaken it. Same with Sphinx's Revelation, we can pay the X, we can kick it. And then Far and Away, we can pick one side, because Fuse still restricts us to only being able to pay that alternative cost when we're casting it from the hand. Alright, I'm going to skip this one. It's not super enlightening. The only thing I was trying to get on this one was that if I wanted to tap down all the traveling philosophers with Gridlock, and then they gave one of the philosophers pro blue in response to that, when Gridlock resolves, it's going to affect all of its legal targets that it still has. So it would still tap down 2 of the traveling philosophers, and then the third one, they would just look at and be like, we can't do anything about that, and then just go on. But since we're a little pressed for time, I'm going to gloss over that one. This one, I found an example online, and the answer that it gave was wrong. so I wanted to give it here. So I have a grid monitor and a bear cub out, and I would like to be able to bestow my Nyxborn Shieldmate on my bear cub. And in case you can't read it from there or we're playing then, bestow pretty much just lets me cast it as an enchantment instead of a creature that I can throw on a different creature. So if I follow the steps of casting a spell, the first thing I do would be put it on the stack. Then what do I do after that?
You would choose the alternate cost, in this case bestow.
Yep, choose the bestow, I pick a target, being my bear cub, and I pay its cost and all that jazz. But am I worried at all that Grid Monitor says I can't play creature spells, and I put the bestow on the stack as a creature?
You
Yes.
were until the latest update of the comp rules that says if you make a choice that it's something like if you make a choice that determines whether or not it's legal to cast the spell.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
In section 601.2e, the game checks to see if the proposed spell can legally be cast. If the proposed spell is legal, the game returns to the moment before casting and then goes to that 17-7. So it's in this section E, which we follow the alphabet, comes after those first few steps of casting a spell and saying that, no, when the game actually goes and checks to see are you legally able to cast this, the game is going to see an aura on the stack. It's not going to see a creature. So the game is going to be like, yep, that's totally fine by me. Yes? Do you agree, Rich? Okay. So how does this change at all if I've got Prophet of Perfect that says I can cast creatures as though they have flash?
Now, when you check that propose, it would be a creature. It wouldn't have flash.
That also says creature cards, not spells.
It has to be a creature card in your hand, not on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Creatures are permanent. Creature cards are everywhere else.
Yeah.
So no go on the flash out? Or
When you put it on the stand.
yeah.
But then it changes to.
I think because it doesn't prevent you from still playing the spell, you can still do it. Unlike the proposed rule beforehand.
So this was just taken straight from the Theros release note. And I didn't have any, last time I gave this, I didn't have anyone correct me on it, so I'm assuming it's still correct. But as we found, I may be wrong. Essentially the Theros release note said, for example, in effect that says you can cast a creature spell as though it had flash, will allow you to cast it as a bestow, with bestow as an aura anytime you could cast it as an instant.
I believe that changed in the same release notes.
In the same
that
release.
fixed it so you could cast it around the grid monitor.
The grid monitor, but you couldn't flash it in
But now I'm second guessing myself. So
Yeah.
And we can change that for you.
Some L3's in the next one.
I'm pretty sure you can't flash it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. And my understanding was that you still could, because in that section 2E, it was looking at, it was pretty much going through and checking the legality of casting. a spell.
But it is neat
Not
legal
clear.
action now.
Now you're
Hey,
Hey, Scott!
Hey,
Get
Scott.
back in here!
Zach, keep it to Tasha.
I haven't had anyone correct me on this, so I'm assuming it's still been true. But
Okay.
it may be wrong. So, if I have a grid monitor
Okay.
and I want to bestow upon my Nyxborn Shieldmate,
Okay.
then normally I would look at 602 or 601.2e, and it looks and checks through the legality of it, and it looks at it as, oh, this is an aura, not a creature. So it's totally cool to cast this
Yeah.
right now. So if I have Prophet of Perfect, that says I can cast creatures at flash speed.
Because you can cast creature cards.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
It's a creature card,
Mhm.
but it's not a creature spell. So you can cast it.
yep.
Okay.
So it's an aura spell, but it's a creature card.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why I did say that.
Perfect.
That makes
Okay.
sense.
That's
That's
not
the
run away.
idea.
Okay, you feel free to run away now.
That's not.
So, yes, the release notes are still correct.
Specifically says spell.
Even though it is going to be an aura, it's going to sort of become an aura on the stack. When it's looking at timing restrictions, it sees, oh, I have flash. Sure, throw me on the stack right now. And that is all I have, other than a few hiccups. That went surprisingly well.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So if I have Scalding Tarn and fetching, I find my Panglacial Worm and activate my Chromatic Sphere, what happens?
You're gonna have to tell me what Panglacial Worm does.
You can cast
Chromatic Sphere, that's the one that, I don't even remember what that
You
is.
gotta manage your mana to draw a card. All in one of those.
Okay, whenever you put a mana into your mana pool, draw.
No,
No, you
it
sack it.
says you can cast it from your library whenever you
Search your library.
but it's the top card of your library.
So, a glacial worm says I can cast it from my library whenever I'm searching my library. And then what is?
This is the case you get whenever you do this game.
Yeah, no, I've never gotten this question before.
Really?
Yeah.
Pretty corner casey.
It's
Yeah.
super corner case.
From what I remember about Panglacial Worm is that there's essentially just like a line in the rules that says all the normal rules we look at, ignore them in the case of this one card. And so what is the mana, the sun, whatever thing?
So chromatic is star, right? No,
Sphere. It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay, yeah, you sacrifice.
It does matter. It does matter.
It does matter. What about
So you
you
sacrifice-
So you sack it for mana, and you draw a card in the same ability. So it's a mana ability that makes you draw a card
Yes.
while you're searching your library to cast a card that you're paying this mana for. Is basically what the question is.
Okay, so I've cracked Scalding Tarn. I'm searching through my library. I find the worm, and then I want to use the star
To play it.
for said worm. Well, the worm is going to be on the stack at that point, not in my library anymore. So I'm going to put, like the very first step, put the spell on the stack. So I'm going to take the worm from my library, put it on the stack, make any choices, blah, blah, blah. And then when I go to pay for the mana, then I'm going to activate the star ability and draw a card from my library.
And you're short of land right now.
Yeah.
Because your Scalding Tarn's not out yet.
Oh, we assume you have enough mana.
Yeah.
That's what else.
Yeah.
Hey, well,
So does the draw ability go on as a?
It's part of the
No,
resolution.
no,
So you're searching for land, then you stop, shuffle your library, draw, and then go back to searching for land?
The top card face down to the
what if you
side.
scribe beforehand?
Yeah, what about number?
Alright, thank you very much. Any feedback, like making sure I know how one of the rules interactions works? Like, oh hey, the presenter didn't know how split cards work. Putting that in the comments section is very helpful. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of the talk.
Already filled out the attendance sheet, right?
Oh yes, there's an attendance sheet thing that needs to be signed.
I honestly don't remember how to do this.
Because you're searching for land.
Yeah, you search, you put it on the stack, you draw the, you can't rearrange your library while you're searching.
Yeah.
So you just draw the top card, like, as you're casting.
Well, you actually put the top card face down to the side, finish resolving the spell, then draw the card.
Does it matter if you started searching through your library at the first card? Then you'd still know.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
does
you
it
would
make
know.
a
What if you had the
difference?
top card?
Well,
Doesn't
it's
matter,
not the
it's
top card,
weird.
because you take it
But
off, put it
again,
on
the
the
issue
stack.
with Panglacial worms, it's actually doing something during the resolution of an ability, which normally you're not allowed to do.
Yeah. Normally, no one has priority.
But the-
But cool snap.
Glacial worm would be on the stack already, so the glacial worm's never gonna be that top card you're setting aside
Right.
to draw anyway.
It doesn't matter. Take the top card, put it off to the side face down.
So-
Draw when you're casting.
Like, you can see that top card move because you're searching your library.
Oh, yeah.
So like, face down, it's pretty
Panglacial's
relevant.
awful.
For some reason.
I mean, you're not gonna show your face down
Is relevant. Yeah, you're not showing.
And now we're rattling.
If you could remove